Hello and welcome to another Retrospectives video, and today we'll be having a look at what's inside this issue of Buster comic from the 4th of October 1980. Buster comic was published by IPC magazines between 1960 and the year 2000. Now when we think of these types of comics from our childhood, it's usually the Beano that springs to mind, but for me, back in the 80s, Buster was always my favourite, with a roster of memorable, entertaining characters including Ivor, Lott and Tony Broke, X-Ray Specs and Faceache. And we'll be taking a closer look at these and other Buster characters as we look through the comic. So let's take another retrospective trip back in time now, page by page and in full HD, as we flip through this vintage issue of Buster. And don't forget, if you want to skip around to different parts of the video, you can use the chapter markers that I've placed along the video's timeline. This issue of Buster has a total of 32 pages, kicking off here with the front cover. At the very top we're promised the results of a Lucky Dip competition from a previous issue, and we'll see more about that on page 28. We get a lovely big bold Buster logo, under which we're informed that the comic comes out every Monday for only 12p, and the date of issue beside that, the 4th of October 1980. Down in the bottom left, the IPC magazine company stamps its ownership on the publication, and in the bottom middle we get to see the price for different countries, namely Australia, New Zealand and Malaysia. The first strip is Buster himself in Buster's Diary, which begins here on the front page next to an unrelated picture of Buster having his apple pecked by a cuckoo clock bird. It's worth mentioning at this point, for those who don't know, Buster was introduced in the 1960s as the son of Andy Capp, a famous newspaper strip character at the time. We never see Buster's dad in the comic, but his mum, Flo, makes regular appearances. In this strip, Buster wants to use his front door as a goal, but his mum opens the door and their old faulty grandfather clock takes a hard knock. Long story short, while Buster's taking the clock to the dump, Bully Bugs trips him up and he slides down a hill straight into a televised antiques roadshow at the town hall. Everything there gets broken as a result, but his clock is bumped back into working order, so the expert TV presenter declares it as the only thing of any value, and an antiques dealer buys it from Buster, who returns home with a stack of money. On page 3 here on the right, in X-Ray Specs, Ray is having trouble with his TV, so he uses his X-ray glasses to look inside, only to spot a hidden mouse nest. The TV repairman repairs the set, and Ray considers what to do with the mouse family. Later on, Ray can't find anything worth watching on his repaired TV, so he sits down to watch his new pets instead, the mice, now living in an empty TV housing he'd been given by the repairman. On page 4 we get Billy Blow, a kid with the super ability to blow air from his mouth really hard. In this strip he's shopping with his dad for his mum's birthday present, but they can't find anywhere to park. There follows a cat and mouse game with a traffic warden, and Billy uses his super blowing ability to foil all of the warden's efforts. Dad manages to buy the present in the end, while Billy uses his super breath to levitate their car above the area with the double yellow lines. A little break from the comic strips on page 5 here, with a half-page advert for the Airfix Modelers Club, endorsed by Dick Emery, and a competition for club members. Purnell Books are advertising their Jim Will Fix It annual, and this was obviously long before the TV show's presenters' crimes were public knowledge. Bottom right corner, a stamp quiz from the Stamp Club, promising free stamp packs to every correct entry that's sent in. You'll need to send a stamp too, ironically, to cover the postage, but this is obviously a way for the Stamp Club to advertise and generate new business. Beginning on page 6, a 3-page comic spread, The Leopard from Lime Street. This uncharacteristically serious strip for a kid's comic stars Billy Farmer, who lives with his aunt and uncle. He developed cat-like super abilities after being scratched by a radioactive leopard at a zoological institute. It's basically Spider-Man but set in England and with cat powers. This strip is an ongoing weekly series, and in this week's instalment, Billy has to explain the dangers of imitating a superhero to a kid who's dressed as a leopard and getting himself into danger. Turns out some local villains are cashing in on the Leopard Man's popularity and selling leopard costumes to impressionable children. A preview of next week's issue here on page 9, and we're teased with the promise of the first part of a giant super poster of Buster. Under that, a small puzzle section called Fun Spot, with 2 relatively easy word puzzles to solve. The answers are right underneath the puzzles here, printed upside down. On page 10 and 11 it's Ivor Lott and Tony Broke, a play on words emerging from I Have a Lot and Stony Broke. These 2 characters come from an extremely rich and an extremely poor family respectively, and their adventures and interactions are always based on their differences, how they sometimes find common ground, and they usually end up with Tony somehow gaining the upper hand as Ivor becomes a cropper while showing off how rich he is. This is one of my favourite comic strips from Buster, and in this episode Ivor and Tony are travelling by train to the seaside, but but Ivor flaunts his wealth in various ways on the journey, making misery for Tony. Ultimately, in an effort to get the upper hand, Ivor throws a bowling ball and damages the train coupling, which results in him and his lavish carriages being left behind, as Tony continues on to the seaside, with the one remaining carriage all to himself. Kid Kong gets his moment on page 12. He's a gorilla who's escaped from the circus and wears a school uniform to disguise himself as a human. He lives with his short-sighted adoptive grandma, who in this story tells him he's needed at the local zoo to be a nursemaid for the baby chimps. Kid Kong obliges and uses his circus skills to entertain the young chimps, but they run rings around him and wear him out completely. Back at home, he's so knackered he has to go straight to bed, and his grandma has to nursemaid him while he recovers. Page 13 brings us Ben the Bad, another serialised strip which continues the story week by week, and it's another serious drama strip. After being falsely accused of burglary, Ben goes on the run from the police. This week's strip sees him wearing a disguise and returning to his hometown to see his mum. This is one I don't actually remember, and I've been unable to find any information online about it, so I'm presuming it was a short-lived series that sees Ben trying to clear his name whilst avoiding detection. If you remember this one, leave a comment and maybe we can fill in the gaps. Helpful Hettie on page 14 spends most of her time trying to help out. In this story, she's going boating with her dad, and in the space of 11 comic panels, she's managed to crash a shed into their car, get them lost with her map reading, and navigate their car into a lake. We meet Mummy's boy on page 15. He's a henpecked young lad whose mum still treats him like a baby. He's even forced to wear a baby bonnet. In this story, he wants to buy a new train set with his savings, but his doting mother will only let him buy baby toys. He hatches a plot though, and uses the toys to create noisy havoc, so his mum caves and lets him get the more age-appropriate train set instead for some peace and quiet. A smashing double-page spread of jokes across the middle pages, 16 and 17. These jokes are sent in by readers as credited on each panel and illustrated by the comics artists. Each joke published earns the writer a prize of £1 and a Friend of Buster t-shirt. You can pause the video to read the jokes if you like, but I will highlight my personal favourite, which is the one at the top right-hand page. Mum asks her son why he's pulling that piece of string. The answer, of course, is because he can't push it. Another serialised strip here on page 18, which will be continued next week. This time it's Johnny's Journey. It's another strip I don't recall, but from the little bit of info I've been able to find and the events of this strip, it appears to be about Johnny and his donkey, Peppy. The donkey has a fatal illness, so they're on a journey to find a cure, getting into scrapes and adventures along the way. Wannabe Watson on page 19 is a boy who gets an idea in his head about what he wants to be, then daydreams about it, and we get to see his dreams in the comic panels. This week he's dreaming of being an action film star like Clint Westwood. By the time he snaps out of it, he's missed his opportunity to see the film that inspired his daydreams. Clever Dick, the daft inventor, and his dog Napoleon get to demonstrate their genius in the next strip on page 20, when Clever Dick's dad sends him out for fish and chips. His attempts to keep them warm repeatedly fail, and after multiple trips to the chippy, he finally has the bright idea of liquidizing the chips and decanting them into a vacuum flask, much to his dad's bemusement. Another ad break on page 21, a promo for the 1981 Buster book, which is now available to buy for £1.50. This is the yearly Buster Annual, and I have two of these in my collection, 1985 and 1987. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in seeing either of these two featured in a video. Underneath the promo, Barrett are advertising their 2-penny Star Chews with a space shuttle competition. There are 1,000 space shuttle model kits to be won, each worth $3.65, by identifying how many differences there are between the two space shuttle pictures, then stating in 12 words or less why you'd like to travel on a space shuttle. An intriguing title on the next page, Barry and Boing, is a 2-page spread and another serialised story that will continue each week. An orphan, Barry Bates, tries to help a spring-built robot called Boing escape from its cruel alien masters. The story is about Barry and Boing and the scrapes and adventures that they get into. This week Boing has been dismantled by the aliens, but Barry rescues him and tries to rebuild him. Unfortunately, Barry isn't sure what he's doing and Boing ends up running, bouncing and even speaking backwards, and he falls down a drain as a result. Back to some semblance of sanity now with disappearing Trix on page 24. She has the handy ability to turn invisible at will and uses this power to help people, play pranks and generally put the world to rights. This week she's putting two rich snobs in their place after they insult Trix's dad's car by calling it noisy. She makes them think that their car is making a noise and they tear it apart trying to identify the fault. In the end, their own posh car is undrivable, so they're shamed into accepting a lift in Trix's dad's noisy car. Not quite Jaws on page 25, it's Gums, the shark with a big old set of false teeth that keep falling out inadvertently. This week he's getting up to mischief using a massive magnet to pull someone's catamaran off course, with the help of his octopus sidekick, Ollie. Obviously his efforts fail, and his magnet attracts a cannon from an old wooden shipwreck. Ollie gets a good clonk from the cannon and throws the magnet at Gums, knocking out his teeth. Bertie Bumpkin on page 26 is an inept farmer who can't quite get things right, but always seems to work it out by accident in the end. This week he can't afford to have an old barn demolished, so he organises a barn dance to raise the money. Unfortunately, a rival farmer decides to change the posters for the barn dance to make it a free event, and a mass crowd turns up for the dance, barging their way in without paying. Bertie has the bright idea to make the musician play faster, and the frantic dancing causes the barn to collapse, solving his demolition problem as everyone runs outside to safety. I found the next strip a little bit baffling, if I'm honest. In Fred's Ferret, the ferret Goliath is asleep for most of the story. His owner, Fred, is bullied at the swimming baths by a boy with massive boots, but the bully ends up slipping and falling into the pool. The boots are so big they trap him at the bottom of the pool, so Fred wakes up his ferret, who chews through the bootlaces, saving the bully from drowning. It's a bit weird and inconsequential, so I'm going to assume that this week's strip was a bit weak, and that maybe they improve in other issues of Buster. On page 28 we meet Ginger, the small cat with the big appetite. Kind of reminds me of Garfield with the food fixation and all that. First thing I noticed is this cat can read, because he's heading into a department store after seeing a sign for a food mixer demo promising free samples of food. Obviously cats aren't allowed, so he goes off and disguises himself as a young schoolboy. Surprisingly this works, but he's a bit impatient, so turns up the speed of the food mixer, which spreads food everywhere and breaks the mixer. In an unexpected turn, the store manager agrees to let Ginger operate the machine manually from under the table, and offers the cat a reward of food from the food hall afterwards as a thank you. Also under the Ginger strip here on this page are those Lucky Dip competition results we were promised on the front page. Seems there were 18 ice cream pictures hidden around the pages of a previous issue in a special competition, and the winners' names are listed here. Boxatricks on page 29 is literally a sentient box with an unimaginable number of gadgets and tools at its disposal. Think Inspector Gadget but in box form. In this story, Boxatricks uses a sausage belonging to two homeless guys to lure a lost dog back to its owner. Not only is the dog returned, but the homeless guys are given credit for rescuing the dog, and they end up being offered a slap-up meal as a reward. More adverts on page 30. At the top, a promo for Jackpot comic, which ended up merging with Buster in 1982, and many of its characters ended up appearing in Buster after that. At the bottom, an offer of free sweets on the front cover of Whizzer and Chips comic, Treebor's Sweet Tooth Sweets, which had a comic strip featuring the Sweet Tooth character inside every wrapper. On page 31, it's another one of my favourite characters, Faceache, who can scrunch his face and body parts into any shape. I do remember when I first read a Faceache strip, I misread the title as Faceache. It took me a few weeks of reading the comic before I eventually noticed the error, and then I realised, of course, Faceache made much more sense. In this episode, Faceache uses his shape-shifting abilities to help another kid avoid having a bath. The final strip, Chalky, is on the back cover. This final page sees Chalky being tricked into using his extraordinary drawing skills to fool someone else's older brother. As payback for almost getting Chalky into trouble, he teams up with the older brother and uses his art skills again to turn the tables on the younger brother. At the bottom of the back cover we get a little bit of small print about the publishers and some legal information, and that marks the end of this issue of Buster comic from the 4th of October 1980. Now, I used to get Buster delivered every week from my local newsagent, but sadly, at that age, comics were a throwaway commodity, so they all ended up in the bin. This particular issue was one that I picked up for a couple of quid from an antique centre, one of those shopping units that has lots of booths run by lots of different sellers. Also, as always, eBay is a good source for old issues, and they can be picked up for as little as 99p, so it's always worth having a look on there if you want to indulge in some old comic book nostalgia. And I actually scanned and converted this issue into a digital book a few years ago, so I've made that available as a download, which you can find in the description. There have also been remakes and reprints produced in recent years from Rebellion Publishing, and I have one of those books in my collection, namely this Faceache compendium, which contains the first 100 Faceache strips from the pages of Buster. Also available are a few periodical releases of brand new content from the Buster universe, rewritten and reimagined for a modern audience. These are still available from the Rebellion online shop, and they're offering a small amount of their downloadable content for free as well, so I'll put a link to that too in the description. I did reach out to you guys on social media for your thoughts and memories of Buster Comics, and here are a few of the comments that you left. Over on my Facebook page, Thomas Cook got the Cheeky and Whizzer and Chips comics and annuals and used to swap them in school. He loved Buster too though. Thomas also mentions, in reference to the Whizzer and Chips comic, he was a whiz kid and boo to all the Chipites. This was partially lost on me, but the next comment shed some light on the subject. From the community post section of my YouTube channel, Michael McDonald thinks Buster was a lot of fun and seemed more unusual than Beano and Dandy, but Beano was his favourite. He has a collection of every annual from 1970 to 2025. Whizzer and Chips is also another favourite, and apparently there was some kind of good-hearted rivalry, and you had to choose whether you were a Whizzer or a Chip. Having never read this comic, I had to look it up, and apparently it was presented as two comics in one, with both halves having their own separate identities. Over on Mastodon, Edinburgh Man got the Beezer and Beano delivered from the newsagent, but often treated himself to a Buster, Whizzer and Chips or Topper if he had some spare pocket money. That said, he only has memories of strips from the Beano and Beezer, and of Banana Man from Nutty Comic. Of course, now Banana Man appears every week in the modern Beano, so he's still out there having adventures today, but he now lives in Beano Town. Back to the YouTube community posts, and Gary Lawless usually received Beano annuals at Christmas, as he used to get the weekly comic. He got Buster a few times and mostly remembers Ivor, Lott and Tony Broke as a favourite. He remembers how Tony usually ended up in a better position than Ivor. Gary also used to be a member of the Dennis the Menace fan club, but alas has lost track of his old fan club wallet and his Dennis and Nasher badges. Andrei Tupolev wanted to point out the small print at the bottom of the front page which shows the prices in other countries. Australia and New Zealand makes sense because of the expat community over there, but Andrei is a bit puzzled about Malaysia. If anyone watching this can shed a bit of light on that, let us know in the comments. Chris Tuitt loved reading all these comics when younger, Beano, Dandy, Beezer, Topper being a few examples. Commando is also another favourite and Chris still collects them. Regarding Commando, I have seen those on the shelves at my local WH Smith, so it's one that's still available today. Atai7185 mentions Action Comic, which had its violent content questioned in Parliament and was eventually banned. This is an interesting one, as the 2000 AD sci-fi comic, which is still going strong today, originally sprang up when Action was banned. The publishers went with the idea of violent content being portrayed as being performed by law enforcers, i.e. Judge Dredd, and for some reason this was deemed as more acceptable. Atai remembers Hookjaw, a strip about a killer shark from the pages of Action. This was resurrected in recent years by the company that now owns 2000 AD, reprinted in issues of the Judge Dredd magazine. Bretsky's dad would quite often bring a Beano home if he'd been to the newsagents. Dennis the Menace was an obvious favourite, as were the Bash Street Kids. Bretsky reckons a lot of kids were probably given the nicknames of some of those comic book characters, like Plug with the large ears and Spotty with a face covered in acne. The modern version of the Beano has subtly changed some of the derogatory names of their characters, like Spotty, who's now called Scotty. This did trigger a minor backlash from some adult fans of the comic, but to be fair, if a publisher's attempt to paint child cruelty as a bad thing upsets you, I reckon you need to take a long, hard look at yourself in a mirror. And finally, remember when UK TV recalls the Monster Fun comic joining forces with Buster, and that Faceache was originally a Monster Fun character. It did indeed merge with Buster in 1976, which is why we see Faceache appearing in Buster. The long-dormant Monster Fun was resurrected in 2021, however, by Rebellion, the publishers of 2000 AD. It started off as a bi-monthly, then monthly publication featuring some of the classic characters including Kid Kong, Gums and Sweeney Toddler. However, I recently noticed an issue on those aforementioned WH Smith shelves, and it had final issue printed on the front, so it might not be around for much longer. The modern issues are available on Rebellion's online webshop that's linked in the description, so you can get them there if you're after a copy. If you'd like to share any memories you have of this classic but often overlooked comic, head for the comments section and let us know what you think, and if you want to be featured in a future retrospectives video, follow me on my various social media platforms where I'll be asking for your comments whenever I'm working on something new. You'll find all the links in the video description. Well, that's all I have for you for now, so until the next video, I'd like to thank everyone who shared their comments, to thank you for liking and subscribing, and of course, to thank you all for watching Retrospectives.